So, naturally, very excited about this next one. We're moving into the world of live performance. After years of isolation and sensory deprivation, live performance feels more urgent than ever. But what are we actually craving from performance? Escape, meaning, provocation? Oh, God, so too much coffee. Or all of the above. Joining us are Moin, Roberts Islam from the Fashion Innovation Agency, Rowena Maddock from Outernet, and Sadie Spencer from the creative experience agency Swamp. These guys are pushing performance beyond the stage into immersive spaces, AR, and responsive environments. So, moderated today by content director at Stylus, Katie Barron. Please welcome Moin, Rowena, Sadie, and Katie. Thank you.
Right. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. So we've had the scene set a little bit already, but I'd like to go back to that question. Moin, if you could just dial that down a bit, please. I would like to ask each of you to kick off, because you all do work in sort of different fields. And just to ask you, from your experiences, what are people really seeking from live experiences now? Is it sort of joyful escape from a tumultuous world, memory-making socialization? Do we want to walk in other people's shoes? A sense of transgression, transcendence even? Sadie, maybe we could start with you as an immersive theatre and brand experience expert.
Yeah, sure. I think the main thing we're finding at the moment is that in an economy where a pint costs upwards of £7, when people go out, they want it to matter, and they're seeking something sort of deeper and richer and storyful, and something that can create those memories. And I think, yeah, something a little bit more transgressive than we've seen before.
So you think this cost of living crisis is pushing us into a place where we expect more from the way we socialise even, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's so much available in our sort of home and digital lives that out experience has to be special and have impact. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Rowena, how about you? Because the Outernet obviously is this huge public space, for anyone that doesn't know, right at the end of Tottenham Court Road. What are you seeing at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, at Outernet, we see people seeking that moment of escapism, like taking a second out of their really busy day to step into a different realm entirely and instantly, almost. Like, we're in a busy centre of Tottenham Court Road. Once you step into our spaces, we talk a lot about world building. We talk about transportive storytelling, so with the screen content, but also with physical experience and being able to really kind of pull people into that. We've had brands like L'Oreal turn the Now building into the streets of Paris. We've had Sol de Janeiro turn the Now building into a Brazilian beach party, and people are just seeking that kind of exploration and just expecting something a bit different from experiences.
Thank you. Moin?
So my interest in kind of experiences and performances from a technological point of view. So the way that I look at it kind of going forward is more about reducing the latency of experiences. So if you've got something where you've got some augmented content, some digital content, it's kind of really reducing that latency, reducing that lag, reducing the uncanny valley as well, that kind of sense of disconnect, and where your brain tells you this isn't quite real, something's not quite right about that. And if you can reduce those two, then you can increase the level of immersion, and then you can actually increase the level of emotional engagement. And with brand partners who we've worked with for a bunch of immersive experiences, that's the key bit. So if you can really increase the level of emotional engagement, then a designer, for example, that makes you a new suit, a new dress, they intend you to feel a certain way when you put it on. And by increasing that level of immersion, you can replicate that same emotion with immersive experiences. And we've done some research around that, if you do really bring that level of immersion right up, in more than 75% of cases, people feel closer to the brand, they feel like they've understood it better, and then actually in over 90% of cases, they'll pay more for that product. if you make that immersive experience compelling enough. So from an audience perspective, it's really important to kind of keep that immersion high, but also from a brand perspective, because it increases value.
Well, thanks, Moin. We'll come back to immersion later, because I want to talk to you specifically about sort of new generation technologies and how they're coalescing. Sadie, I'd like to talk about phygital storytelling in theatre and performance particularly, because there's so much chatter at the moment about a yearning for the unplugged era, people finding it very difficult being very online to sort of want to escape from that. But technology can immeasurably heighten theatrical experiences. What are you seeing or doing that's bridging that divide at the moment?
Yes, so Swamp makes work at sort of the intersection of theatre, cinema, and immersive art. So we love playing in that liminal space, and we definitely cross over digital and live, that phygital buzzword, frequently. Both in our own, we make our own ticketed work, and we also make brand experiences, and kind of one will inform the other often. So it's very much our area where we play, but what we really love doing is being a bit mischievous in the gap between fact and fiction. So, for example, our experience a couple of years ago called The Drop, I don't know whether anyone in this room came along to that, but how it started off was that audiences, when they booked their ticket, came along to a venue we'd taken over in East London. It's actually an old betting shop that we completely refitted out. And the beginning of the experience was them going inside a lift, and they had to go up to a meeting to meet someone. But the lift breaks down. And we did this sort of double rug pull where we knew that they'd think this was part of the experience. So we did a thing where our technician came out and said that actually the experience had broken down and that we were going to have to restart the whole thing. So one of our technicians came out, and then suddenly on screen, on CCTV, they get shot in front of your face. And so you're like, oh, wow. And there's an amazing moment where you see people who are so used to being told to keep their phones away in theatre, not knowing what to do, and no one's coming to help them. And then they suddenly start going, oh, well, should we just Google how to get out? And if they do that, they start finding that we've planted all this stuff all over the internet, these kind of fake web pages that will take them into loads of weird folklore and will basically enable them to escape from the lift. And then they came out of vent the other side and found themselves in a perfume shop, and then that took them onto the sort of streets of East London and off where they went near a hotel to collect a hotel key room. And what was amazing was that by the time they were there, we'd only employed like a couple of actors dotted about, but by the time they were out in London, they thought that everyone was a performer, because they were kind of in this headspace.
So I suppose with this, it's almost like using technology as a kind of destabilising experience, sort of playing on the sort of mischief of misinformation and disinformation in a way. Yeah,
I think there's so much. I mean, we don't want to be putting out fake news, but there's so much trust in your phone. And if you can kind of intercept that, that becomes part of the storytelling.
So it's about kind of rethinking sort of the deception that's innate to theatre as it is, but thinking about it through a sort of new technological lens.
Yeah.
That's super fascinating. Now, I want to, this idea of sort of spaces being alive, as it were, sentient spaces. Rowena, you're the perfect person to talk about this, because I think, in some instances, and if we think about what the future of live performance will look like, the venue itself will feed into that. What do you think the venue can bring to the table when it comes to performance?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as Outernet, we are, we're a multi-sensory 360 environment. And I think the power of that in experience, in performance, it's absolutely proven. So, an experience is not just what you see, it's what you can smell, what you can feel, what you can taste, what you're interacting with personally. And we know that these kind of spaces and experiences can have real kind of visceral impact. We've done tons of research. We actually worked with Neuronarrative Lab on some behavioural neuroscience research, where we actually put trackers on people entering our spaces, and we saw when they entered the Now building and saw the butterfly trail, one of our experiences, their heart rates actively spiked upon entering. So it is that real sort of visceral piece, and how it can change a space, can change people's physiological being and also mindset, which is just absolute gold to brands. So yeah, I find that
I've got a lovely quote here from you actually, where you said it was about opening up people's senses and mindset to make them more receptive to the experience they're about to receive.
Absolutely, and I think Outernet as a district, again, all of our spaces are modular, so I think there's something really important in the power of the consumer journey through a space and kind of travelling from space to space. We see it a lot with activations where you can use one particular space, like our Now Arcade immersive tunnel, to actually be the start of storytelling, to almost prime people before entering into the next space of the experience. We do district dominations where you can kind of travel through our whole space and kind of have a different feeling in each space. We've got something coming up later in summer that I am absolutely not allowed to talk about, must not say brand.
That's very annoying of you.
I know. Where each of our spaces is gonna tell a story. It's gonna be sort of a different feeling, a different environment, should we say, in each space that tells a narrative. So. Yeah.
So I suppose, if you're a brand or a theatre company using this, you could have these spaces that start to prime people to feel happier, more excited, more terrified, more anxious, any of these things that you want to queue up, basically.
Absolutely, and that's in the content, it's in the physical, tangible touch points. It has to be kind of all of those things together. That's where the magic is.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's how brands can really effectively use environments and spaces to kind of tell that narrative, but also shift people's perception and make them more open to particular experiences and messaging.
Yeah, and quickly.
Yeah.
Moin, I want to come to you and talk about, we've talked about sentient spaces and talk about mixed reality because, we know AR is around us, VR not quite so much, but people use AR via their phones even. How important, and because of your background in fashion particularly, things like VR, AR, XR, AI combinations of, how important are they going to be to things like presentations, like fashion shows, for instance?
I think they'll be huge. I mean, it goes back to that level of immersion I was talking about and that kind of brand engagement. There's a project actually up on the screen now we did with ILM X Lab, so the guys that do all the special effects for Lucasfilm and the Star Wars films. And we had 2 hours of real-time augmented reality over the space. And the designer was from Macau, and he wanted to take the audience to Macau. And rather than rely on show notes or the audience's imagination, we actually took them there using augmented reality content. And we had, the garments up there on stage. We had a digital model wearing digital garments. They were able to change things in real time. And it just really allows for a lot more storytelling, a lot more immersion, a lot more engagement with the audience. And then if I can fast forward a little bit, if that's all right, that kind of leads us on to technologies, that combination of AI with augmented reality. It allows for us all to be in the same physical space, but each have an individual experience within that space. So we kind of had this talk about, if you recreated a catwalk of the 90s with all the supermodels of the day, and you've got Cindy and Naomi and Eva walking down the catwalk, recreated digitally for you, you could each have a different experience of that. And if there's a particular outfit that you respond to, you can do an emote, you can do some sort of response, showcase that, and then Cindy walks over and gives you a high five. Just little things like that would just make it a bit more personalized, that bit more engaging.
You might be revealing a little bit about your own sort of preferences there, but we won't go into that. Just to check with that, is that with wearable technology or without? Where do you, because you are someone that works sort of 5-10 years in advance. How do you think that will work?
It's a little bit of both. So some of the time, if it was something to do with physical sensation, then you're talking about haptics and so on. But if you're just talking about your movement and capturing your responses to things, that doesn't necessarily have to be done with wearables. A lot of that can be done remotely using cameras. So gesture control and motion capture and all these things can be done remotely using cameras. There's a project up there as well that kind of highlights that. Obviously, if you do have wearables on, you can capture even more responses. You were talking about the sort of bodily responses, so pupil dilation, the direction of your gaze, the kind of skin temperature, and all these kinds of things, rate of respiration, all these kinds of things give people an indication of how much you're engaged with content and what in particular you're kind of attuning your attention
But you'd need to see it through some sort of lens or contact lens or...
So
yeah.
those things would be a worn device or a
Yeah.
headset of sorts. But for AR, I mean, these days a lot of it can be done through other devices or larger screens, or you can have kind of projections onto gauze in spaces where people, semi-transparent gauze, or people aren't necessarily noticing that.
It's interesting that, we're talking about immersion there and talking about brand experiences, and I think a lot of brands are very aware that their audiences, consumers, fans, they want to be made to feel more, but very often we focus on the kind of the happy feelings or the kind of just pure exhilaration. Sadie, I know that you work on experiences that go a bit darker, a bit sort of deeper and darker at times. And we've previously talked about the need for kind of maybe more high art to go to more challenging places. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did just say we shot someone in front of audiences before, didn't I? So we're quite happy to go dark.
That was the deeper and darker I had in mind.
No, it's really interesting. I think we really believe that immersive kind of is its own medium, and it's sort of maybe having a real moment, partly because of the cost of technology coming down. It's sort of something, it's an art form, I think, that we need to take quite seriously. And if you think about sort of how different art forms like theatre or film have evolved over time, and what subjects they're willing to take on and where they're willing to go, and when they're willing to go more psychological and challenging. We love getting into that. So we did a show about a year ago called St. Jude, where it was basically the conceit was that you came along and put on a headset and sat in a little booth and got to talk to someone who was unconscious and in a coma. And it was using this AI technology that it was just before ChatGPT launched. So it was quite an interesting time to be playing around there. Our technology that we were using was actually, we had written everything, we had scripted it all, but it was basically channeling the conversation down different branches. It was sophisticated and interesting, but very different how ChatGPT was working. But it meant that everyone had this unique storytelling experience with this sort of immersive audio. And as you spoke to this person, you found out more and more about them, and there were various twists and turns, and you learnt how they'd ended up there, and eventually sort of had to help them escape. But it was quite a challenging subject matter.
I tried that, actually. It was challenging, and I got so freaked out, I didn't help them escape. I just legged it.
Many people fail. That's okay, Katie. Especially post-COVID and illness and stuff. But I think it was really interesting to explore. And we often find ourselves holding brands' hands and saying, go a bit bolder, allow something a bit more crazy to happen.
More challenging.
We'll take them through to the other side of the story.
I'm going to ignore the phrasing you used when you said lots of people fail, Katie. Let's just put the language aside for a minute. The interesting thing for me with St. Jude was, of course, you were using sort of synthetic beings. So again, you're talking about that space that we are moving into, where we're coexisting with artificial intelligence and sort of synth beings. But maybe for Moin and Rowena, actually, with this one, what are your thoughts on that idea of having, you've got visual effects, AI, biotechnologies, about having spaces in which you have both human performers and synthetic performers?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more of it, especially in realms like video games. There are lots of NPCs, non-playable characters in video games now that are driven by AI. And you can interact with them, you can talk to them about things, you can kind of explore open worlds in a lot of games. And it just adds a whole layer of depth to the experience. And you have conversations that you wouldn't necessarily have with a real person. And you maybe elicit behaviors that you wouldn't necessarily showcase to a real person. You might feel a bit self-conscious, you might feel a bit silly to be sort of too in the game and kind of talking using the vernacular of a game, whereas if you're talking to an NPC, just an AI character, you're a bit more liberated, a bit more freed to that. So those kinds of interactions, I think, teach us very different things about our behaviour, and they're becoming more commonplace. You know, we're talking to chatbots online just when we're shopping and all sorts, and we're getting very used to those interactions, and I think it's just opening up a different side.
And the more anthropomorphized they are, the more we're willing to connect very often.
In some cases, yes, but actually, if you've got an avatar or sort of an interaction with something that isn't very similar to you, it does free behaviour. There's something coming up on the screen every now and then where it's kind of me talking to a digital version of myself, and that was a kind of retail experience that we created with Microsoft. And although we created it with an exact likeness, what we found was the engagement with that sort of service, that digital human stylist, was actually a lot higher if it didn't look exactly like you. It would still have your measurements, so it would be able to kind of make all the styling recommendations, but people didn't actually want it to look like them. They didn't want to see all their lumps and bumps. They didn't want to see all their imperfections. So I know it's not quite the same as not being anthropomorphized, but you know, that level of abstraction actually helps in some instances.
Rowena?
And at Outernet, I mean, it's a space that's absolutely designed for that kind of experience, like the built-in tech stack. You can kind of do all of those things interacting with our screens and tons of products that align with what Moin's just described. Something that we've launched relatively recently is Facescape AI. So obviously AI is on everyone's minds at the moment, but this is a photo opportunity in our spaces where it captures you and kind of transforms you into a particular being or theme even, and kind of brings it straight to screen. So it is kind of that adapted version of oneself into another universe. So it's just great how tech and spaces can do that.
And Sadie, I guess, do you think you'll go further down that route of mixed kind of human and synthetic performance?
Yeah, who knows, really? It's such an interesting time to be making work.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, though, for us, it's often really simple pieces of technology that we rely on in some ways. And it's, you know, we made a short film that's like an interactive short film based on a really simple piece of technology. But for us, it was about how far could we push that once we knew we were using that. All it did was flipped between two screens. What was the narrative we could create around that?
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the things we're finding most important at the moment.
I know we're out of time now, so just very quickly before we go, in terms of things you think, one thing that you think will change the game for performance, live storytelling, what do you think, Moin, you, to start?
I'm going to go with AI, and it's that really obvious answer, but I want to go with an angle that maybe people aren't thinking about. We've all heard about agentic AI, so we're going to have personalized AI that works with us on a daily basis. It's either worn through a pin or through your Apple Watch or maybe even just on your device, answers your emails, does some of your shopping for you. It will learn a lot of things about your behavior, and a lot of things about your preferences. Those kinds of agentic AIs, if they then interact with performance experiences, then you've got a massive level of personalization in there. But then it gets a little bit scary when you add in, if, for example, it has access to your purchase history, then you're a lot more sort of susceptible to being sold to at the right time with the right products and so on. And then it gets scarier still if it's got biometric data about you, about what you respond to, and things like your search history. It becomes very personalized, probably more so than you would want. But without wanting to go too dark right at the end, I think those are things that are going to really impact all areas of life going forward, but things where you can interact digitally, so like performance, I think are going to become a lot more nuanced than maybe we want.
Thank you, Rowena.
Well, to Moin's point, I think we're seeing hyper-personalisation be a really sort of defining trend in experiences and storytelling in a less kind of dark way than that. I think where people coming to an experience can actually choose their own narrative by information that they're choosing to supply and kind of become part of that story. We had Spotify Wrapped at the end of last year, where people could actually share their own Wrapped story, and it was going straight to our giant screens, and then they were able to then go into the next zone and get it personalised onto their merch. That's just kind of dipping your toes in, but curating an experience based on kind of personal, chosen real-time data.
And Sadie, before we go?
Yeah, I think I'd second those things. I think choose your own adventure will get more sophisticated. I think people often choose a crap adventure is the problem. And technology might start to enable us to sculpt and curate lots of individual journeys really well.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Yeah.